All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. I welcome you all from the platform of Open, which is a premium group of overseas Pakistani exclusive at leadership roles. It facilitates knowledge sharing, community building, and networking where people come together and make a difference. The aim of Open is to enable an environment for collaboration, growth, and innovation. So today from this platform, we are going to be discussing something very relevant and quite interesting, which is basically evolution of startup ecosystem, primarily in Pakistan and in MENA region. I have with me the panelist, Mazar, Masud, and Rahman, and we all are related to this topic in one way or the other. So we will be briefly and in some detail also exploring different challenges and underlying potential opportunities, again in the said regions that I've mentioned, and pick up brains of these experts and understand how to go forward, especially for those people who are looking into this direction. Personally, I believe startup ecosystem is it primarily flourishes when we have entrepreneurs who can diagnose the pain points in a market which is a sizable market and create a solution, and that solution can be scaled on a global level. And this solution needs to be backed by tech, by VC community, and it needs to be supported by relevant governments. Institutional support needs to be there. So in the end, we can have a conducive environment which can give rise to more such opportunities. In the present, there have been some real success stories that have come out of Pakistan, to name a few. Kareem, Baikia, Daraz, they are the success stories that have emerged out of this region, which gives hope to the others who would really want to follow. In 2019, Pakistani startups, they raised some $36 million in funding from local and foreign investors, which is a promising and an encouraging number. That says a lot about the potential that prevails in the region. If I go on to the panelists, I'll just start with myself first. My name is Mahwuush. I'm the co-founder of One Perfect Stay. We're a holiday home alternate accommodation model company. We handpick homes across UAE and we curate them. We make them look we make them look quite appealing to the global tourist population, who travel to Dubai and UAE from all across the world. So in a nutshell, basically, we are an Airbnb that is backed by physical asset. Our company cuts across all three key pillars which drive UAE's economy, which is tech, tourism and hospitality, and real estate. So this is long and short of my intro. I'll go on and introduce Amber to you. Amber is a seasoned commercial marketeer, spent 5 years in Pakistan and 10 years in UAE with leading consumer brands, directing their growth agenda driven by impact and her growing concern on gap between curriculum output versus evolving job market needs, accelerated by digital transformation post-COVID. She and her educationist sister left their full-time jobs to jump into edtech space. Passionate to create a platform that allowed kids 6 to 18 years of age to develop the love of lifelong learning. Very interesting. Moving on to Mazar. Masud is a director at Kekst CNC, a global strategic communications firm owned by Publicis Group. He has advised a range of companies from multinational corporates to startups. He recently helped launch a dedicated communications offering from startups called Kekst CNC Rise, and is working with PropTech, FinTech, and EdTech on their PR campaigns. So this is the introduction of the panelists who are on board with us, and I would like to start with you, Mazar. Your profile is quite interesting, and it's quite encouraging you to it's quite encouraging to see that you are helping, especially the startups in their initial stages of how to take off and how to really focus on their marketing and PR campaigns. So I would ask you, how important is communications as part of the startup journey for any startup?
Thanks, Mahwuush. Thanks for the introduction. So, I mean, I'm a big believer in communications, and I think it's incredibly important as part of the startup journey, irrespective of where you are on that journey. So, I mean, whilst we work with startups pre-launch, we also work with a number of startups who have launched and are on significant growth paths and aggressive chasing or trying to achieve aggressive growth ambitions. But wherever a startup is in that journey, I think that it's incredibly important that they consider communications and the role of communications and the significant benefit that can be derived from marketing. I mean, just to put this in context, it's really interesting to note that 80% of startups actually fail. For tech-centric startups,
Right.
actually, that rises to an incredible 90%. And this is according to an analysis by Harvard Business School. And the MENA region is actually no exception to that. I mean, here, just like in other parts of the world, we have, startup failures, and a number have occurred in a range of industries, from e-commerce and advertising to software
Right.
and financial services. And it's a very, useful exercise to understand why predecessors have sunk, to help navigate that treacherous startup journey that brave entrepreneurs embark on. And whilst there is a plethora of causes, the failure of startups to take communications and marketing seriously is one trap that can be avoided. It's actually, really interesting. Based on some analysis of startup post-mortems, which was conducted by CB Insights, it was found that 14% of startups failed due to poor marketing. And in another study conducted by Autopsy on 60 failed startups in the MENA region, poor marketing was cited for a tenth of failures, and a further 14% died because they were outcompeted. And communications can help build a defense against that. So therefore, just to kind of summarize, communications should not be an afterthought for startups. If it's done poorly, it can mean that a startup's value proposition is, lacks understanding and lacks clarity, and may not even be compelling enough. If communications is not done well, the differentiation with competitors may be ill-defined. Employees may be irregularly engaged with, leading to a lack of staff morale. And communications may be kind of, not being utilized to help with the strategic thinking, with brand positioning, which again can have a detrimental effect on the life of a startup. So it's incredibly important to think about it.
Right. I mean, if I give my example of how I founded One Perfect Stay, and I would completely agree with you that 70% of our business is based on sound marketing. And now that includes different channels that we are marketing at and how we are analyzing the data on all of these platforms, well, which is something relevant to my industry. But I do understand how important marketing can be, that, on different platforms, sometimes we are even measuring the impressions to the leads and to the conversion ratios. Yes, that makes complete sense. Mazar, I also
Actually,
want to...
if I may add, actually, maybe
Yeah.
that's a really, really important point, and a very, a point that, listeners and viewers should really take note on, because, I mean, there's a huge interplay between communications and marketing and data. And
Right.
when the two work cohesively together, that's when you can potentially have incredibly powerful storytelling. Often when advising clients and working with clients, we use data day in, day out when analyzing the success or not of campaigns, when understanding what content resonated with audiences, target audiences, and didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an evolving process, and sometimes you actually take real-time data, analyze it, understand what works, and then kind of adapt campaigns as you go along. And I think that's an incredibly important point.
Right, right. Mazar, that takes me to another point, marketing broadly speaking. But when we talk about PR campaigns, in this time and age, they're more focused on social media, or which are the other avenues which can also be taken into account when you're rolling out PR campaigns, especially from the viewpoint of startups, because we are mostly stringent on budget, but we are
Yeah.
passionate about growth. So how do you strike the balance, and what would you advise, being a marketer expert?
Yeah, I mean, I always speak to clients about thinking like communicators, and when you think like communicators from a PR perspective, it's always really important to think in an integrated way. So absolutely, social media channels are incredibly important for startups, and in some cases that's the most cost efficient option in terms of telling your story. So that absolutely should be a part of the campaigning strategy, but startups shouldn't discount the impact and significant impact of traditional media. What we find in the UAE is a very receptive audience when it comes to media, and in hearing about startups and the launch of startups, the startup journey, understanding the background of founders and who they are, what they're trying to do, and what pain points, as you mentioned earlier, what pain points are they trying to address? What is it that they're trying to change? What disruptive force are they trying to implement, which will help make our lives easier? And I would encourage startups to think as a storyteller. So think about what stories are important to you, and that makes sense, and what you're passionate about. And then think about the kind of channels that work as a part of that. So, I mean, just to kind of, I guess, summarize some kind of advice. If what I would say is, really assess where you are in your journey and what you want to achieve, and over what timeline, and that may kind of, to some extent, determine the immediate priorities when it comes to storytelling. Really have a think about your audiences, and what is it, over the course of the next 6 months, 12 months, what customers or clients do you particularly want to target? And you might want to kind of segment your audiences. And as a result of that, different stories may resonate with different audiences. So, a story to a young person may be very different to the one that you craft for an older individual. But and then kind of think about the messaging, and have some, whether that's on social media or whether that's with on media itself with journalists. But to your point, in terms of other channels, I would really encourage startups to, once you've crafted those stories, to really start developing relationships with the press. Social media is incredibly important, but also think about the likes of dailies in the UAE, whether that's the National or Gulf News, Arabian Business, etc. And also broadcast channels, all of which actually have a keen interest in telling the story of startups, telling the story of how traditional sectors are being disruptive, how traditional business models are being challenged, and so I would think very broadly and and in an integrated way
Holistic.
when thinking about how
Right.
to tell your story.
Right. Sounds good. Great. Talking of storytelling, having Amber Rahman on board. Amber, would you like to shed light on what's your story? Give us your story. आप अपनी story बताएं.
Well, the story is very simple, and I really liked a couple of points, and I would pick on those in my storytelling of what Mazar mentioned as well. But thank you for the introduction. So I'm not going to repeat on that, but really focus on what I'm and my co-founder are doing right now. So my co-founder is in education, and she's been a teacher by education. She's an engineer, but by profession, she's been in teaching for a very long time. And I've been in marketing and commercial marketing for the last 15 years. So what I've been noticing, and this is more after I became a mother and my son started going to school, I started noticing something that started bothering me quite a bit. And that was the gap between the curriculum versus what and how I wanted him to develop. And it started with my own personal journey of really looking out for solutions where I wanted to help my son develop into a more holistic individual where, yes, he could be performing great at school or maybe not, depending on how he is with academics. But I wanted him to be a more well-rounded individual. And this is how we now see people and talent when we look in the real world. You go and, whoever has worked with corporates or even in startups, the more well-rounded you are, the more experiences you have, the better you can actually perform because of those experiences. Now, what happened was that your core curriculum, whether any curriculum in school is being followed, it gets you to think in a certain way. Children are born with other skill sets like being curious, being
inherent qualities.
Yeah, and these are very natural qualities. They're very curious about everything. They would ask the why a lot. They are naturally collaborative. They are naturally critical in how they see the world. They are also quite creative. And then what happens is that the school system and us as parents in most of the region, what we do is we start conditioning them. And the more we condition them, we actually make them move into a certain direction, which is very different from how the world is evolving. So now we've been hit by COVID and suddenly the whole world has been tossed into a new situation and everybody's sort of trying to come to grips with the fact that, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this? Yes, it is a problem. Identify the problem first, then move on to a solution. Now, no textbook will tell you how to deal with the situation. No degree will tell you how to really move forward from here. What's really going to work with you are your basic instincts, your basic human conditioning that you're actually born with. So we identified that gap, that while curriculum is great and we still want to send our kids into schools and off to colleges and universities, we want more holistic individuals to develop who can take on any situation that may be thrown at them. In a future, nobody knows how it's going to look like. So the jobs are going to evolve. 1/3 of the jobs are actually going to be redundant in the next 5 years itself.
And so we are seeing that happen.
So that was the whole basis of it, that it was a personal pain point. I wanted a solution for my son. I went out and looked in the market. I really did not get anything that was either credible enough or creative enough. And then we just thought that, I cannot wait because in a couple of years, my son is going to grow. I need a solution right now. I'm sure many other parents are struggling for it as well. And then we just created a platform. Now, what happened was COVID happened and it just accelerated the whole digital transformation in the education space, which meant there was an opportunity on multiple levels. There was an opportunity on the supply side for people who were looking for more flexibility, who were actually quite talented. They might not be working with schools, but they were quite talented. But because of certain reasons, they have never explored a career option. So this gave them an opportunity to engage on a platform irrespective of where they were sitting, if they could be sitting in UK, they could be sitting in Pakistan, they could be sitting in KSA or Dubai, and they could engage with us from a supply point of view to create courses which were very much oriented towards 21st century skills. So COVID actually helped break the geographical barriers and bring more in the supply chain. Now, on the demand side,
so I think pivot the business quite rapidly, because
we did.
like
And
every
that's
industry.
what we did. Because we did start off with physical model. That's when we started thinking in January, and COVID was not there. But then we repivoted, and everything became very digital. There was a point in time when we were thinking whether we should continue with both the phases. But as a startup as well, you have to make sure that you can focus and prioritize. So we prioritized being a digital platform, because that
Need of the hour.
get more impact. At the end of the day, one thing that also differentiates a startup from any other company is that you're driven by a purpose and a passion, and you really want to create impact. So we thought that this created more impact, both on the supply chain side and on the demand side. So abhi, for example, kya hota hai ki a teacher here, he's a great photography, he's a professional photographer and a videographer, and he has a skill set, and he's sitting in UAE, but kids sitting in Pakistan and any other geography can actually access that course, right? So geography does not become a barrier, and vice versa. So there, especially in our academic stream, we have a lot of great teachers who are sitting in the UK. And especially with also the economic situation that's there in the UK, supply is there. So they don't need to be here to impart those services. And anybody who's sitting in UAE can take advantage of a teacher who's experienced in a certain field who's sitting in UK. So on both sides, you actually bring the customer, the demand and the supply together, the customer and those who can provide the service together. And this is what we are trying to do.
Right. Well, that takes me back to, my initial years when I had founded One Perfect Stay, and we all know UAE and Dubai being an economy which is primarily driven by real estate, and then, the balance between demand and supply. We always had supply, which is the home side, and the supply side was something which was gradually met, knowing what the marketing techniques were and what platforms to use. So I would say in hindsight, that was my biggest challenge that I conquered over a period of time. If I ask you, Amber, you just launched in January, it's not been too long. What would you say has been your biggest challenge, and have you overcome that yet?
So January, it was conceptualizing, right? And we formally launched after our initial tests in July, August. But, well, the challenges for startups, they only evolve. They never,
Tell me about it.
evolve hote hain next level. So, you've been in real estate, and you are working in real estate and working एजुकेशन सेक्टर, ये बड़े ट्रेडिशनली इन सेक्टर्स का मॉडल बहुत डिफरेंट है और बहुत फिजिकली ओरिएंटेड है इन टर्म्स ऑफ द इंटरेक्शन दैट यू हैव विद द कस्टमर्स, इन टर्म्स ऑफ हाउ यू सर्व द कंज्यूमर. लेकिन and this is where we are trying to disrupt things. So जो सबसे बड़ा challenge है वो mindset shift का है कि for example in education you can deliver effective learning online. अब स्पेशली विद कोविड, क्योंकि सारे होम स्कूलिंग के ऊपर चले गए थे एंड बहुत जल्दी एवरीबडी हैड टू अडैप्ट. तो वी एज पेरेंट्स वी नो कि जो फर्स्ट 6 months थे दे वर हॉरिबल. They were horrible because everybody was trying to come to grips with either Zoom or Seesaw or a lot of the other apps that were being literally thrown around you, and it was painful because education as a sector was not ready for that digital transformation. और उसमें सबसे कम काम हुआ था. अगर आप दूसरे sectors को देख लें, जिस तरह से मेरा FMCG का background है, तो when you think about e-grocery or e-commerce as such, when you think about retail, that has developed a lot more. So it have it's a bit ahead of the curve. Education सबसे पीछे था in the curve. So सबसे बड़ा जो challenge रहा है वो mindset shift का है, because suddenly yes digital platforms accelerate हो गए, लेकिन उसके ऊपर effective learning deliver करना और credibility build करना और लोगों को convince करना कि ऐसा हो भी सकता है has been our biggest challenge so far. लेकिन उसका again solution भी है, because this is where communication becomes very important, जिसके ऊपर मज़र ने भी पहले touch किया था कि this is where you then need to communicate and continuously communicate to your audience कि आप क्या करते हैं, क्यों करते हैं, and give them a piece of your service so that they can actually engage and experience that service with you and see कि क्या वाकई they can you can create value. As long as you're creating value in their lives, you have a chance to grow. If you're not creating value, then as a startup as well, that's a great feedback, because no feedback is bad feedback when you're starting out. So that's a great feedback, because it gives you an opportunity to rethink your business model, to rethink the service you're offering, to rethink the different aspects, and then give it yourself.
Fail and fail fast and redirect from there onwards.
Absolutely, you have to have that mindset and have that mindset कि यार मेरे पास बहुत बुरी feedback आ सकती है, अब मैंने इस feedback के साथ क्या करना है. So not sunk over that feedback, but really say कि मैंने इस feedback के साथ किस तरह से काम करना है ताकि I can improve my service as fast as possible.
What I would share as my experiences, because we are a vital part of hospitality, and again UAE is driven by hospitality to such a large extent. We were like the frontline soldiers who had the biggest impact of this COVID. But then there are other industries that really got the better of the catastrophe or the crisis. Look at grocery shopping, InstaShop, huge success story that has come out of this. Would you say the same about education? Because schools are closed, schools band hain, and even schools are trying to get onto the online platform. So probably did that help you spread your message more convincingly, or maybe the audience were a bit more ready?
Audiences have, well, actually shuru mein it had its the sword had both its sides.
Double-edged sword.
Yes, because the experience with digital transformation was so choppy in the beginning that nobody wanted to experience it. लोग कहते थे यार मुझे वापस physical environment में जाना है. So there was definitely a bit of a resistance to online evolution. लेकिन अब parents are very comfortable, because अब क्या हुआ है, after 6 months into the whole pandemic and home learning and also e-learning, parents discovered कि यार मुझे गाड़ी निकाल के 3 बच्चों को different जगह पे drop नहीं करना पड़ता in different academies, which saves a lot of time, which means कि उसी time में वो चाहे वो एक नहीं वो 2 skill sets या 2 different चीजें learn कर सकते हैं. मेरा भी time बचता है. Secondly, what also has happened over time is कि क्योंकि जो providers हैं, they have also been on a learning curve. उन्होंने भी they have also figured out how to deliver effective learning. और बच्चों के साथ के ऊपर भी बच्चे तो वैसे ही they are very fast learners, तो उनको तो पता है कि उन्होंने devices कैसे manage करनी है, बल्कि अब ये होता है कि parents भी पता चल गया कि devices कैसे manage करनी है. तो अब parents से dialogue करना आसान हो गया. शुरू में वो एक challenge था, लेकिन I think the world has evolved beyond it. Second, एक और चीज जरूर है कि जो कि challenge में भी जाती है, but just one thing कि because of the school systems and the curricular system, education में especially जो concept है of after school learning या 21st century learning वो relatively नया है. So it's not a concept which people understand right away when you tell them कि आपके बच्चे के लिए आपका curriculum is there. We are not trying to substitute it. We're not another school, but what we're trying to do is कि आपके बच्चे को हम सोचना सिखा रहे हैं, आपके बच्चे को सवाल करना बता रहे हैं. And how we are doing it is by application of what he's learning at school into real life. कि अगर, and it's a very simple thing, right? कि अगर मैं चाय बना रही हूँ और पानी उबल रहा है, वो पानी उबल क्यों रहा है? या फिर अगर आप बेकिंग कर रहे हैं तो बेकिंग में रेशियो प्रोपोर्शन किस तरह यूज होता है, एंड हाउ कैन यू एक्चुअली अंडरस्टैंड द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ रेशियोज एंड प्रोपोर्शंस थ्रू समथिंग एज सिंपल एज बेकिंग दैट यू ऑब्जर्व एट होम. सो वो जो कॉन्सेप्ट है समझाना कि वो इतना नया है इन दिस पार्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड कि आई थिंक वी आर स्टिल ऑन दैट एजुकेशन journey towards the parents, towards our consumer audiences. So अगर आप marketing के point of view से बात करें तो there is a huge onus on us कि हम पहले communicate करें, लेकिन पहले educate करें कि how can this deliver value in the lives of the consumers. So that is there. I think there are other markets that we always take examples and inspiration from, but there are other markets. I think this concept is very developed in US. And UK.
Of course, Khan
The
Academy
region is picking up. The good thing also about this region, Mahwuush, is कि इस region में चीजें थोड़ी सी late start होती हैं, लेकिन बहुत जल्दी pick होती हैं. So the acceleration rate is very, very fast. The adoption and acceleration.
Right. Sounds good. Mazar, if I come back to you and if I ask you, I mean, past few months or the entire 2020 has been the biggest learning in the overall scheme of things, as far as humanity and all kinds of, professional or personal disciplines are concerned. What has been your biggest takeaway as a marketeer, as a marketing expert? And what are some of the success stories that you have seen emerge out of this situation?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I mean, in all honesty, I'm kind of the kind of guy who sees a glass half full. So
that's awesome.
when COVID
that's
happened,
the first thing entrepreneur needs to be.
So when COVID happened, okay, yes, of course there were challenges, and we all had to adjust, and we all had different rates of adjustment. But I saw the opportunity for us as a business in terms of kind of re-engaging with clients, having those key conversations with clients, because now clients were really, for some, it actually became a bit of an existential question in terms of, well, how do we now conduct our business, or is our business model relevant anymore? And, to what extent, how long will this carry on? And so what we saw from a PR perspective is, some campaigning transformed into more kind of reputation management and crisis management. We also, I mean, there was a big play on the role of business in society, and the idea of purpose, business purpose, became even more relevant. But just picking up on what Amber was saying around the digital transformation. So we saw that playing out from two different perspectives. On the one side, where, we have clients who have, traditional business models, they started kind of reevaluating their business and, resetting or creating pivots and in order to become more relevant in the new normal, as it were. But at the other end, we saw such a rich pipeline of new offers, which were completely reforming the way things were done, challenging the status quo. And, that acceleration and that digital transformation was really rapidly accelerated during COVID. And on the back of that, that's, one of the reasons why I decided to work with the team and launch Kekst CNC Rise. Because Kekst CNC Rise, ultimately at its core, is focused on disruptors. It's focused on those startups and businesses, high growth companies are creating change. And so, I mean, I think the kind of big takeaways for me were, irrespective of what situation you're in, kind of try to see the plus points. Rethink strategies if required. Don't always be fixated on what you've done previously, but have an open mind to change. And secondly, I mean, to Amber's point earlier, really think hard about your value proposition. So we've done that as a business, but also every client that start working with, one of the first stages that we go through is really understanding their value proposition in the market, and then going on to think about how are we going to communicate it. So I think those are probably summarizes some of the key takeaways from this period.
Right. Sounds great. Some great points that have been highlighted by both of you. Amber, coming back to you, there's a lot of, I would say, fancy or frilly ideas around startups. It's the new thing. Everybody wants to get onto the bandwagon, but having been through the journey for the past 5 years, I know there are a lot of tears, blood, sweat behind all the frills that are on the foresight. So there are two components of the same proposition. One is profitability, and the other is growth. Now, being an entrepreneur and highly, someone who always likes to see the glass full, not even half full, it becomes quite difficult, to strike the balance. Is there a balance? Should there be a balance? And if yes, then what stages? How would you prioritize it? Becoming profitable as soon as possible, or get the desired funding and put it in the growth and leave profitability maybe for the second or the third phase?
I'll take that question in two parts. So one thing is about the whole hype around running a startup or being a founder, and then thinking that you can be the next Mudassir Shekhar, right? So I think that ambition is great, but what people forget is that even Kareem did not get where it is overnight. Facebook didn't get where it is overnight. So they forget what they have been through, and they just remember the point in time when the news comes out that they have raised certain funding or they've been acquired. But there's a lot of sweat and a lot of hard work that goes behind the scenes for a number of years before it. So first thing, the first question about this hype, that nobody should do anything in life. Forget about having a startup or not. Nobody should do or have, I think it's a curse to do something that you don't love. So nobody should have that curse of doing things that they do not love. And if you really believe in certain thing and you cannot find the solution, and you believe कि आप वो solution बना सकते हैं और आप उसको जल्दी से market में ला सकते हैं और value create कर सकते हैं, then आप startup बनाएं, then आप जाके उस purpose, that purpose is going to drive things through forward. Because there will be times आपको समझ नहीं आएगा कि मेरे पास funds कैसे आएंगे. आपको अपने पैसे से, of course, सबसे पहला जो सबसे पहली investment होती है वो आपकी अपनी होती है. जब आप
seed funding is
तो आपने जब अपने पैसे लगाए होते हैं तो आपको पता होता है कि यार I have to get something out of it. And Silicon Valley में भी 90% of the startups fail, so people should not forget that. तो again, frills से startups नहीं चलती हैं, passion से एक sense of purpose से startups चलती हैं. Startups exist करने का एक मकसद होता है. अगर हर company या हर बंदा startups करने लगे तो फिर बाकी ecosystem तब भी balance खराब हो सकता है. So there is a role that corporates play, there is a role that startups play in a certain economy and ecosystem, and everybody has to do what they're best at and what they believe in. So first things first, please do not follow the hype and get into it. Only get into it if you really believe in it. And I'm really early on in the journey, so definitely I look up to people who've been in the journey for the last 5 years, 10 years. And I know that there have been nights that they haven't slept. So are you ready to really give up that peace for a certain point of time or peace of mind, but have that peace at heart that you are engaged in a process of creating.
It's worth it at the end of the day.
So अगर जवाब yes है तो आप बिल्कुल कूदें उस कुएं में और जिसे कहते हैं उस आग में. लेकिन अगर नहीं है और आपने सिर्फ हाइप फॉलो करनी है तो जाके एक स्टार्टअप के लिए काम कर लें. I think that's much better. या कंसल्टेंसी करें. It's really again purpose driven. दूसरा जो आपका सवाल था, I think the second part of what you were saying was more around the fact that
What comes first?
How do you prioritize,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
So again, it really depends. I mean, that it really
Like
depends
I
on.
can tell you, for me, it was always about the bottom line. I had to meet the bottom line, and there were so many offers that I had to let go consciously because I know that probably I or the VCs were not on the same page, and it's worked, but there were some pros and cons necessarily attached with the proposition, and I made peace with it.
I think what's really important in that process is, again, going back to the fact that आपको हमेशा पूछना चाहिए. I mean, one exercise that I do every night I go to speak, कि यार, why am I in this? What is it I'm going to do? And then what is it that, how do I see it in 5 years time, 10 years time, even 2 years time? Because we're not a corporate, right? So in 1 year हम कहाँ होंगे, in 2 years कहाँ होंगे? आपकी exit strategy भी क्या होगी? So actually, having clarity on that will define के growth or profitability का relationship आपने कैसे define करना है. So there is no silver bullet to it. It really depends on why you exist and what is it that you want to achieve out of it. तो आपकी exit strategy क्या है? I think now the investors have also become very very aware of the fact that you need to look at growth, but you need to be very aware of how that growth has been achieved. So if you ask me personally, I believe in profitability. I think any business has to be sustainable and profitable.
At least at the operational level.
पैसा लेकर आ रहे हैं तो आपने investors को return भी देना है. अगर आप profitable नहीं हैं तो आप उनको return कैसे देंगे? So you need to have that thing built into the business model कि profitability is important. आप खुद भी नहीं sustain कर सकते, आप लोगों के पैसे के साथ इंसाफ भी नहीं कर सकते. लेकिन जो दूसरी चीज है कि growth at you need to grow fast, but not at any cost. That is something where the balance really needs to be struck. And I think the investors have become smarter with a few examples that have actually happened in the past. So again, this is part of the whole evolution of the startup culture. There will have to be balance, and profitability cannot be thrown out the window. That's my take on it. There are still people who believe कि हाँ जितनी जल्दी growth दिखाओ at any cost दिखाओ, VC का पैसा आ जाएगा. But then again, that depends why the company exists and what its goal is on funding.
That's
लेकिन they also need to also remember कि funding जो है, there is nothing like free lunch, right? कोई प्राइवेट इक्विटी या कोई VC आपको पैसे देगा तो उसको रिटर्न चाहिए, तो आप क्या उसको रिटर्न दिखा सकते हैं कि नहीं दिखा सकते?
Yeah, and I think the basic numbers, the equity that you're willing to let go, and what are you trying to raise against that. There's so many variables to it. I think for the first session, because we'll have to wrap it up, we're a bit short on time. We'll have to wrap it up. We covered most of the prime points which should be known to somebody who has a brilliant idea and they want to execute it. लेकिन इसको हम for sure continue कर सकते हैं आगे भी. Let's wait for people's feedback, our members' feedback. Let's see what they have to say about it, and then probably we build on it and continue our conversation probably in the next session. Mazar, do you have any giveaways? Do you want to sum it up in your way?
Well, I guess I think it's just a reiteration of what's been said, and it's actually been fascinating listening to both you and Amber on the points that you've made. It really resonates with the conversations and echoes the conversations I've had with clients. I mean, I think in summary, I think the key points from my perspective, it's really interrogate your value proposition, really think about your audiences and kind of segmentation of your customers, and tell stories in a way that communicates that value proposition and reminds people at every single opportunity on all the right channels how you will add value to their lives. And I think that probably summarizes everything that we've kind of said.
Yeah. Great. Amber, आपकी तरफ से कुछ any closing comments from you?
No, thank you for this opportunity, Mahwuush. I think it was really great, and I'm really looking forward to more conversations in the future as well. It was also fascinating listening to Mazar, especially on communication, because I also do believe कि आप जो भी काम कर रहे हैं, that's important. लेकिन लोगों को पता नहीं है, तो you know, it sort of just stays very close to लोगों को बताना बहुत
Tell your story.
Tell your story is very important. अच्छा, और
What's your story?
Story. So, let's say story telling करना और वो story create करना एक art है. वो naturally हर एक को नहीं आता. तो अगर आपके पास एक बड़ा जबरदस्त proposition है, so please reach out to the experts like Mazar himself, because they can actually help you create that story, because वो एक आपके पास story होगी तो फिर you know you can reach out to more audiences. But last but not the least, I would just say, being a startup myself, I think startups, and Mahwuush, you would also maybe agree on that, startups do have a lot of passion, and this is why we exist, because we are moved by something so much that we want to give in our time, which is the most
we want to commit to it,
resource, right? And we want to create an impact. Lekin usme na, I think it takes a village to make a startup successful as well. The marketing strategy, the investments that you
team
that
so
have.
important. Your team is so
और
important.
product आप बनाएंगे वो definitely important है, लेकिन it's so important कि जिन networks में आप हैं, अगर आप किसी startup को जानते हैं, I personally do that. I do try their services, I do try their products, and if I believe that they are really adding value, I also talk about it. So it takes a village to take startups also into that area where you can create word of mouth. So that's also what I'm hoping with this platform as well, that a lot of people get the opportunity to tell their stories and engage audiences along the way, and get that sort of support within the community.
Sure. Well, great conversation. I'm so happy we exchanged some great ideas, some honest conversations, and probably, you know, we'll build more on it in the future. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Mazar. Thank you so much, Amber. And I'm glad I shared a little bit of my journey as well.
Absolutely.
Yes, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right.